when the woman on the phone, the one my own son insisted was my soulmate, asked for another $5,000 for a customs emergency. I agreed without a moment's hesitation. My son, Daniel, who was listening to the call on speakerphone in my living room, beamed with pride, seeing my instant generosity as proof of my love for her. What he did not see was the small recorder plugged into the phone line, or the tracer program running on my laptop. Daniel saw an old man head over heels in love. I saw a predator walking deeper into a trap, and I was collecting the final piece of evidence I needed to send her to prison. Before I explain how I turned the tables, please subscribe to the channel and share in the comments if you think online dating is safe for seniors. My name is Vincent Romano, and at 73 years old, my life in Portland, Maine, had become a study in quiet repetition. After 40 years as a police detective, I had traded the grim realities of crime scenes for the peaceful predictability of retirement. My wife, Maria, had passed 3 years earlier, and the silence in our small house was a constant, heavy presence. My days were structured by simple routines, a morning walk by the harbor coffee with other retirees, and long afternoons spent building ship models in my basement, a hobby that required the same patience and attention to detail as my old job. My son, Daniel, a man in his late 40s who managed a string of local retail stores, worried about my loneliness. It was his idea that I try online dating. "Dad, you are a catch," he had said, setting up a profile for me. "You just need to get back out there." I was skeptical, but I agreed, mostly to appease him. That is how I met Isabella Montoya. Her profile was captivating. She was a 68-year-old widow, an art dealer from Spain who now lived in Boston. Her photos showed a beautiful woman with kind eyes, posing in museums and sun-drenched European cafes. Her messages were intelligent, charming, and deeply attentive. She asked about my life, my work, and my grief for Maria, showing a level of empathy that was both intoxicating and, to my detective's mind, a little too perfect. For a month, we communicated only through messages and emails. She was building a rapport, a foundation of trust. I found myself looking forward to her daily notes, a bright spot in my quiet life. I mentioned her to Daniel, and he was ecstatic. "See, Dad? I told you," he said, his relief palpable. "I want to meet her." The first red flag, small but distinct, appeared during our first phone call. Her accent, which I had expected to be Spanish, was a vague, unplaceable European melody that sometimes slipped into something that sounded almost Eastern European. It was a minor inconsistency, something a civilian might not notice, but to a detective, it was a flaw in the suspect's story. I casually mentioned it to Daniel. He immediately dismissed it. "Dad, stop being a cop," he said with a laugh. "She has probably lived all over the world. You cannot analyze a person like they are a crime scene. Just be happy." It was the beginning of a pattern. Every time I pointed out a small discrepancy, Daniel would accuse me of being cynical, of letting my old job poison a chance at happiness. His desire for me to not be lonely was so strong that it made him willfully blind. The first request for money came a week later. Isabella called me, her voice frantic. A valuable painting she had shipped to a client was stuck in customs in New York. There was an unexpected import tariff of $2,000 that had to be paid in cash immediately, or the deal would fall through. She was devastated, apologetic, and promised to pay me back the moment the client paid her. The story was slick, filled with just enough detail to sound plausible. The detective in me screamed that it was a classic scammer script. But the lonely old man she thought she was talking to was intrigued. This was no longer just about companionship. It was a case. "Of course, my dear," I said, my voice full of concern. "How can I help?" I sent the money via a wire transfer, knowing full well it was gone forever. It was not a loss. It was an investment. It was the cost of admission to see just how deep this conspiracy went, and the first piece of hard evidence I would use to expose not just a scammer, but my own son's dangerous denial. After I sent the first $2,000, the dynamic of my relationship with Isabella shifted. The dam had broken. She had successfully extracted money once, and now she knew she had a willing target. Her calls became more frequent, her declarations of love more extravagant and florid. She spoke of our future together, of moving to Portland, of buying a little house by the sea, of the life we would build. It was a beautiful, intoxicating fantasy, and she was a master at selling it. She would describe the paintings she was supposedly selling, using rich, artistic language that sounded authentic to a layman, but which I suspected was lifted from art history websites. At the same time, the emergencies began to multiply with an almost comical regularity. 2 weeks after the customs incident, her laptop, which contained all her client files, supposedly crashed. She needed $1,500 for a specialized data recovery service in Boston that only accepted direct bank transfers. I sent it. A month after that, she had a sudden medical issue, a dental emergency involving a cracked molar that required immediate, expensive surgery not covered by her insurance. $3,000. With each request, my son, Daniel, became her greatest champion. I would tell him about the latest crisis, feigning worry and indecision, and he would urge me to help without a moment's hesitation. "Dad, it is just money," he would say, his voice full of earnest conviction. "You cannot let her suffer when you have the ability to help. It shows how much you care. This is what you do for someone you love." He was so invested in the idea of my happiness, so desperate for me to have a companion, that he had become an unwitting accomplice. He was the perfect insider, the trusted family member who could pressure me and validate the scammer's narrative in a way she never could on her own. His denial was a fortress, impenetrable to logic or suspicion. One evening, over dinner, I tried to gently probe the walls of that fortress. "Daniel," I said, stirring my soup, "does it not seem a little strange that a successful international art dealer has so many financial emergencies, and apparently no credit cards or savings of her own?" He grew defensive immediately, putting his fork down with a sharp click. "She is a widow, Dad. She is on her own. You, of all people, should understand that things happen, that sometimes you get overwhelmed. You are just looking for excuses because you are scared of being happy. Mom would want you to move on." He weaponized my love for his mother against me, a tactic that was both cruel and deeply effective in shutting down the conversation. He did not want to see the truth, because it would mean admitting his own judgment was flawed, that the perfect solution he had engineered for his lowly father was a dangerous lie. While I was placating Daniel and playing the part of the lovelorn victim for Isabella, my real work began in my basement workshop. My old detective skills, rusty from 3 years of disuse, came back to me as naturally as breathing. I was no longer building ship models. I was building a case. I started with the wire transfers. Each one went to a different name, a classic money mule tactic to obscure the final destination of the funds. I recorded the names, the bank locations in different states, and the amounts in a detailed ledger. I used a simple, commercially available software to trace the phone number she called from. As I suspected, it was a burner phone, a prepaid cell that bounced its signal off multiple towers, but I was able to narrow its general location to a specific 100-block area in Brooklyn, New York, not Boston, where she claimed to live. The most interesting clues came from her emails. I am not a computer expert, but my 2 grandchildren, Daniel's own kids, are. My grandson, Alex, is 19 and a computer science major at the local university, a quiet kid who lives in a world of code. His sister, Chloe, is 17, a high school senior with a mind as sharp as a prosecutor's. One afternoon when they came over for dinner, I decided to bring them into my confidence. After we ate, I took them down to my basement, away from their father's willful blindness. I laid everything out on my workbench, the printed emails, the wire transfer receipts, and my growing ledger of inconsistencies. Unlike their father, they did not dismiss me. They listened with a quiet, focused intensity, their expressions shifting from curiosity to a shared, cold anger. "Grandpa, this is a classic romance scam," Alex said, his eyes lighting up with technical curiosity as he looked at the emails. "The grammar is a little off in places, and the sentence structure is weird. It is like they are using a translation program. Let me see the email headers." He sat down at my computer, and in a few minutes of furious typing, showed me how the email's metadata. The hidden digital postmark revealed that the messages were originating not from the United States, but from an internet cafe in Romania. Chloe, meanwhile, was focused on the human element, the story itself. "Her stories are full of holes, Grandpa," she said, her finger tracing a line in one of the printed emails. "She says she was at a gallery opening in Boston on a Tuesday. But in another email, she talks about a terrible storm in Boston that same day that made her stay inside. I just checked the weather archives on my phone. It was sunny and clear in Boston all week. They were my partners, my investigative team. While their father was blinded by wishful thinking, his own children were clear-eyed and logical. They saw the evidence for what it was. Together, we began to actively gather more intelligence. Alex set up a secure, high-quality recording system for my phone line. Chloe helped me draft questions to ask Isabella, subtle, clever questions designed to elicit contradictory answers about her past, her supposed family in Spain, and her business dealings. We were a 3-person task force, working in secret from my basement, building an airtight case against the woman who was trying to rob me, and in the process, proving my own son dangerously, tragically wrong. The immediate consequence of bringing my grandchildren into the investigation was a surge of renewed purpose. I was no longer a lone operative working in the shadows. I was the head of a small, highly motivated task force. Alex and Chloe brought a youthful energy and a native understanding of the digital world that complemented my old-school investigative instincts. The betrayal I felt from my own son's willful blindness was now counterbalanced by the sharp, unwavering loyalty of his children. For the next month, our secret operation in my basement became a well-oiled machine. Alex took charge of the technical surveillance. He installed monitoring software on a dedicated laptop that I used for all my email correspondence with Isabella. This software logged every bit of data she sent, tracing IP addresses and flagging suspicious attachments. He also set up a voice analysis program to run on the recordings of our phone calls. "Her accent is definitely Slavic, Grandpa," he confirmed one evening, pointing to a waveform on his screen. "And the software is flagging certain speech patterns that are common in professionally trained scammers. They use specific phrases to build empathy and urgency. She is working from a script. Chloe became our lead profiler and strategist. She created a detailed timeline of Isabella's entire narrative, cross-referencing every claim she made. She had a corkboard on my basement wall, covered in index cards and red string, looking like something out of one of my old detective movies. "She is getting sloppy," Chloe announced one afternoon, tapping a card. "Last week, she told you her late husband was a banker named Carlos. This week, she mentioned he was an architect named Javier. She cannot keep her own lies straight." Chloe's greatest contribution was coaching me on how to play my part. She helped me craft my responses, teaching me to sound more lovelorn, more desperate, more like the perfect victim. "You need to sound more breathless when she says she loves you, Grandpa," she would instruct, listening to a recorded call. "And when she asks for money, you need to hesitate, but then give in like you just cannot bear the thought of her suffering. Make her believe she has you completely under her spell." The full weight of Daniel's betrayal became clearer with every piece of evidence we gathered. He was not just ignoring red flags. He was actively running interference for the scammer. One Saturday, he came over while I was on a recorded call with Isabella. She was in the middle of a tearful performance about needing money for an emergency visa renewal to avoid being deported. Daniel, overhearing, started frantically gesturing at me, mouthing the words, "Help her! Help her!" He was so thoroughly convinced of her story that he was now my in-house pressure agent, a tool the scammer was using without even knowing it. After the call, I tried one more time to show him the truth. "Daniel," I said quietly, "I have sent her over $10,000 in 2 months. Does that not seem wrong to you?" He threw his hands up in exasperation. "Dad, for the last time, stop bean counting. You are finally happy. You have a wonderful woman who adores you, and all you can do is worry about the money. I would think you would be grateful. I am the one who pushed you to do this." He genuinely believed he was the hero of my story. The irony was crushing. He saw himself as my savior, while his own children were working tirelessly to protect me from the disaster he had orchestrated. The plan to expose her and to confront Daniel with his own folly began to take shape. It could not just be a quiet arrest. For Daniel's sake, for him to ever understand the depth of his mistake, he needed to see the truth with his own eyes. He needed a confrontation he could not dismiss or explain away. Chloe came up with the idea. "We need to get her here," she said, pacing in front of her corkboard. "In person. We need to lure her out of the shadows." It was a bold, risky move. Most romance scammers never agree to meet, but Isabella was growing arrogant. She believed I was a bottomless well of cash and devotion. It was time to make her an offer she could not refuse. The next time she called, I followed Chloe's script. "Isabella, my love," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "I cannot bear this distance any longer. I want you to come to Portland. I want to look after you. I have been thinking I have a significant amount of money in my savings, over $100,000, that I want to put into a joint account with you when you arrive, so you will never have to worry about money again." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I had just dangled the ultimate prize, a jackpot she had been working toward. "I am also having a special dinner," I continued, "so you can finally meet my son, Daniel. He is so excited to meet the woman who has made his father so happy." I had baited the hook with her greatest desire and her greatest enabler. She promised to check on plane tickets immediately. The trap was being set. We were no longer just collecting evidence. We were orchestrating a sting operation, and my own son was the guest of honor at the takedown. The decision to lure Isabella to Portland was the turning point in our investigation. It was a conscious shift from a passive, evidence-gathering operation to an active, high-stakes sting. The bait, a joint bank account with a $100,000 balance, was so overwhelmingly tempting that it overrode all her professional caution. 2 days after my offer, she called me, her voice a symphony of joyous tears. She had booked a flight. She would be arriving in Portland in 10 days on a Friday afternoon. With a date set, a final, meticulous phase of my plan began. My first step was to bring my old professional world into my new personal one. I scheduled a meeting with a detective I had mentored 20 years ago, a sharp, reliable man named Mark Corridon, who was now a senior investigator in the Portland Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. We met for coffee in a quiet diner, away from the formalities of a police station. I laid out the entire case on the table, the ledger of wire transfers, the IP address traces from Alex, a timeline of contradictions from Chloe, and a USB drive with the audio recordings of every phone call. Mark listened with the focused intensity of a true professional, his expression shifting from friendly respect to grim determination. "Vince," he said when I was finished, shaking his head, "this is one of the most well-documented romance scam cases I have ever seen. You have done 90% of our work for us." He agreed to my unorthodox plan for the takedown. He understood that this was not just about arresting a criminal. It was about showing my son an undeniable truth. Mark promised to have 2 plainclothes officers ready and waiting on the night of the welcome dinner. They would not make a move until I gave a prearranged signal. My next move was to set the stage for the main event, the dinner itself. I told Daniel that Isabella was finally coming, and he was ecstatic, his face lighting up with a triumphant, "I told you so," smile. "This is it, Dad," he exclaimed. "This is the start of your new life." He was so blinded by his own successful matchmaking that he did not question for a second why a woman who had needed money for a visa would suddenly be able to fly across the country. I asked him to handle the dinner reservations. "Make it somewhere nice, son," I said, "a place to celebrate. And I want you to invite Alex and Chloe. I want my whole family to be there to welcome her." He readily agreed, proud to be the master of ceremonies for an event he had engineered. While he was busy booking a table at a fancy downtown restaurant, my grandchildren and I were preparing our evidence for presentation. Alex compiled the audio recordings into a single damning track, editing together Isabella's most glaring lies and contradictions. He put her shifting accents and her repeated use of scammer script phrases back to back, creating a devastating audio collage of her deception. Chloe, meanwhile, created a simple but powerful visual aid. She took the corkboard from my basement and recreated it on a series of large poster boards. She used printed copies of emails, bank statements, and weather reports, connecting them with thick, red lines of yarn, visually mapping out the entire web of lies. It was a low-tech but incredibly effective display that would be impossible to misunderstand. I also made one final financial move to test the scammer's greed. The day before her flight, I called her, feigning last-minute panic. "Isabella, my love," I said, "I was at the bank setting up our joint account, and the manager said that because you are not yet a resident of Maine, there is a state-mandated new account fee of $500 that has to be paid from your end before I can deposit the $100,000. Can you send the money to me?" It was a ridiculous, nonsensical claim, but I was betting on a psychological principle I had seen 100 times. A con artist on the verge of a huge score will often make a small, illogical investment to protect their prize. As I expected, she agreed instantly, promising to wire the $500 to my account that afternoon. It was the final, perfect piece of the puzzle. Not only was she coming to steal my money, but I now had a record of her sending money to me under a fraudulent pretense. A beautiful reverse-no card I could play in front of my son. The stage was set. The actors were in place. The evidence was prepared. The police were on standby. Daniel thought he was hosting a welcome dinner for his father's new love. He had no idea he was the guest of honor at a meticulously planned intervention, and the main course was going to be a cold, hard serving of the truth. Before we go on to the final act, please hit the like button. It really is a huge help to the channel. I was ready to show my son the truth, and a con artist was about to have the worst first date of her life. The execution of the sting began on a cold, clear Friday evening in Portland. The restaurant Daniel had chosen was an upscale Italian place downtown, a hushed and elegant space with white tablecloths and soft lighting, the perfect respectable setting for the chaos I was about to unleash. I arrived first, my grandchildren Alex and Chloe with me. They carried a large, flat artist's portfolio, which held Chloe's evidence boards. The maitre d', whom I had spoken to earlier that day, showed us to a secluded corner booth, offering a nod of understanding. He believed we were preparing a surprise presentation for a family celebration, which, in a way, we were. Alex discreetly placed a small, powerful microphone in the center of the table, disguised as a salt shaker, ensuring our conversation would be perfectly recorded. Daniel arrived next, his face beaming with a proprietary pride. "Look at this place, Dad," he said, gesturing around the room. "Perfect, right? Nothing but the best for Isabella." He was practically vibrating with nervous excitement, the proud architect of his father's new life. He did not even notice the portfolio case tucked away in the corner of the booth. He just saw his happy, well-dressed family ready to welcome a new member. I had arranged to pick Isabella up from the airport myself. But at the last minute, I had called her with a panicked apology, claiming my old car would not start. I told her to take a taxi to the restaurant, and that I would cover the fare. The real reason was tactical. I wanted her to arrive alone, to walk into the ambush without me by her side as a comforting presence. Her entrance was dramatic. She was a handsome woman, I had to admit, though she looked a decade younger and significantly harder than her doctored profile photos. She was dressed in an expensive-looking coat, carrying a designer handbag, every inch the part of a successful international art dealer. She scanned the room, her eyes landing on our table. A brilliant, warm smile spread across her face as she saw me, and she glided towards us. "Vincent, my love," she exclaimed, her voice a little louder than necessary, the strange, unplaceable accent echoing in the quiet restaurant. She leaned down to kiss me, a theatrical gesture for Daniel's benefit. I accepted it, the scent of her strong perfume making my nose wrinkle. Daniel leaped to his feet, his own smile wider than hers. "Isabella, it is an absolute honor to finally meet you," he gushed, shaking her hand vigorously. "I am Daniel. I have heard so much about you." "And you," she said, turning her practiced charm on him. "Your father is a wonderful man. You must be so proud of him." I then introduced Alex and Chloe. She gave them a quick, dismissive smile, the kind an adult gives to children who are not relevant to the main event. She had no idea that the two quiet teenagers at the table were the architects of her impending doom. For the first 30 minutes, I let the charade play out. Isabella was a master performer. She regaled Daniel with stories of art auctions in Geneva and gallery openings in Paris. She spoke of her tragic, lonely life after her dear Javier passed away. She gazed at me with what appeared to be pure adoration, occasionally reaching across the table to touch my hand. Daniel was completely captivated, hanging on her every word. He kept looking at me with a triumphant expression that clearly said, "See, I was right. She is perfect." I played my part, nodding and smiling, the doddering old fool in love. The turning point came when the appetizers arrived. "Isabella," Daniel said, raising his water glass for a toast, "I just want to say, on behalf of my father and our whole family, welcome. We are so happy he found you." "To new beginnings," she said, raising her own glass and looking deep into my eyes. This was my cue. "Speaking of new beginnings," I said, my voice calm and steady, "and of family. Isabella, my grandchildren have been so excited to meet you. They actually prepared a little welcome presentation for you. A summary of our journey together." A flicker of confusion crossed Isabella's face. Daniel looked puzzled but pleased. "A presentation? Dad, you did not tell me." Chloe stood up. "We just wanted to show you how much we have been paying attention to your story." "Isabella," she said, her voice sweet but laced with ice. She retrieved the portfolio, and one by one set up the 3 large evidence boards on an empty chair facing Isabella, the red yarn connecting the lies looking like a spider's web. The plan was in motion. The show had begun. Chloe stood beside the evidence boards with the quiet, confident poise of a prosecuting attorney delivering her opening statement. The ambiance of the upscale restaurant, with its soft music and clinking silverware, became the surreal backdrop for the takedown. Isabella stared at the boards, her charming smile frozen on her face, a look of profound animal confusion in her eyes. She clearly did not yet understand what she was looking at, but her predator's instinct was screaming that something was wrong. Daniel was the first to speak, his voice a bewildered whisper. "Dad, what is this? Chloe, what have you done?" "It is a project for school, Uncle Daniel," Chloe replied, her voice never wavering as she looked directly at Isabella. "It is a case study on narrative consistency. For example," she said, tapping a printed email on the first board, This is an email from you, Isabella, on October 12th, describing a terrible rainstorm in Boston that kept you inside all day. She then tapped a second document next to it. And this is a certified weather report from the National Weather Service for Boston on October 12th. It was 72 degrees and sunny. The color began to drain from Isabella's face. The fixed smile twitched. "I must have confused the date," she stammered, her hand fluttering to her throat. "An easy mistake to make," I said, my voice gentle. "Like confusing the name of your late husband. Was it Carlos, the banker, or Javier, the architect?" I leaned forward, my folksy lovelorn persona gone, replaced by the cold, inquisitive tone of a detective. Isabella's eyes darted from me to the boards, then to Daniel, searching for her ally. But Daniel was staring at the boards, his own face, a mask of dawning horror. He was finally, truly, looking at the evidence. Alex, from his seat, spoke for the first time. "We also have some interesting audio for you to hear," he said quietly. He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, and placed it on the table. The small microphone I had disguised as a salt shaker was now a speaker. Isabella's voice filled the small space around our booth, a high-quality recording of one of our first phone calls. The vague, pan-European accent was clear. Then, Alex played a second clip from a more recent call where she had been agitated about money. In this one, her accent was sharp, clipped, and unmistakably Eastern European. The mask had slipped, and we had it on tape. "Your accent seems to be as inconsistent as the weather in Boston," Chloe noted dryly. The woman was cornered. Her charm evaporated, replaced by a cold reptilian fury. "This is insane," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "Vincent, what is the meaning of this? Your grandchildren are harassing me." She was still trying to play Daniel, her last and best line of defense. "Daniel, please," she said, turning to him, her eyes wide with feigned hurt. "Your father is letting his grandchildren bully me. You must stop this." Daniel did not respond. He could not. His entire reality was crumbling. He was staring at his own father, not as a lonely old man, but as a cool, methodical investigator. He was looking at his own children, not as kids, but as a brilliant technical analyst and a ruthless profiler. And he was looking at Isabella, not as a grieving art dealer, but as a cheap liar whose entire story was being dismantled piece by piece on a corkboard. The climax was not a single moment, but the slow, agonizing death of my son's denial. I delivered the final definitive blow. "There is also the matter of the $500 you so graciously wired to my account yesterday," I said, pulling a bank receipt from my jacket pocket for the non-existent new account fee. "You see, my friend, Detective Corrigan with the Portland Police Department, was very interested in that transaction. It is called wire fraud." I glanced up over her shoulder toward the front of the restaurant. On cue, two men in unremarkable business suits stood up from a table near the bar and began walking calmly and purposefully towards our booth. Isabella's eyes followed my gaze. When she saw the two men, a wave of pure animal panic washed over her face. The game was over. She knew it. She shoved her chair back, grabbing her expensive handbag, ready to flee. "Detective Corrigan," I said, my voice carrying a note of professional courtesy as the two plainclothes officers arrived at our table. "This is the woman who calls herself Isabella Montoya. I believe you have a few questions for her." The detective nodded, his eyes fixed on the terrified woman. "Ma'am," he said, his voice calm but unbreakable, "we need you to come with us." It was all done quietly, without a scene. They escorted her out of the restaurant, her head down, the image of the sophisticated European widow replaced by that of a common criminal being led away by the police. The victory was absolute. In the stunned silence that followed her exit, I looked at my son. He was pale, his hands were shaking, and he was staring at me as if he had never seen me before. The welcome dinner was over. The intervention was complete. That is how I got my so-sweet revenge. In the deafening silence that followed Isabella's departure, the three of us, my grandchildren and I, remained seated. The remnants of our uneaten appetizers sat on the table, a strange still life from a celebration that never was. My son Daniel was still frozen, his face a pale, ghostly mask of shock. The smooth, confident man who had walked in an hour earlier was gone, replaced by someone I had not seen since he was a small boy, who had just broken a precious vase, a look of profound dawning horror at the consequences of his own actions. He finally turned to me, his eyes wide with a mixture of shame, confusion, and a new, startling respect. "Dad," he whispered, his voice cracking, "all this time you knew?" "I knew from the first phone call," I said quietly, not with anger, but with a weary sadness. "I just needed you to see it too." That was the true climax of the evening. The arrest of the scammer was a simple matter of police procedure. The shattering of my son's willful blindness, that was the real victory. We did not stay at the restaurant. I paid the bill, and we left, a strange, silent procession. The drive home was filled with a heavy, unspoken weight. Daniel said nothing, simply staring out the window at the passing city lights, the architecture of his own certainty having been completely demolished. The life after that night was a period of slow, careful reconstruction. The legal consequences for the woman who called herself Isabella were swift. Her real name, as we learned, was Katerina Volkov, and she was part of a much larger international romance scamming ring. The evidence my grandchildren and I had compiled, the recordings, the financial ledger, and the beautiful evidence boards, became the cornerstone of the state's case against her. Faced with the mountain of irrefutable proof, she cooperated, giving up her handlers in exchange for a reduced sentence. Detective Corrigan later told me that our case had helped the FBI unravel a network that had defrauded seniors of millions of dollars. My $10,000 was a small price to pay for that result. But the most important reconstruction was within my own family. For a week, Daniel was a ghost. He did not call. He did not visit. He was, I knew, wrestling with a profound sense of shame and guilt. He had not just been wrong. He had been arrogantly, dismissively wrong. He had belittled my experience, invalidated my concerns, and actively worked against his own father on behalf of a criminal. He had to confront the fact that his well-meaning desire to see me happy had made him a fool and put me in danger. He finally came to my house the following Sunday. He did not bring excuses or justifications. He simply stood in my living room, his shoulders slumped, and apologized. "I am so sorry, Dad," he said, his voice thick with an emotion I had not heard from him in decades. "I was so focused on what I thought you needed that I refused to listen to you. You were trying to protect yourself, and I got in the way. I treated you like you were old and clueless, but you were the only one who saw the truth. I am ashamed of myself." It was the most honest conversation we had had in 20 years. We talked for hours, not as a father and a son in our established roles, but as two men. I explained the detective's mindset, the way small inconsistencies point to larger lies. He, in turn, explained the fear he had felt seeing me so lonely after his mother died, a fear that had made him desperate to believe in a perfect, easy solution. It was not an excuse, but it was an explanation. Our relationship did not magically heal overnight, but it began a slow and steady mend. The condescension in his voice was gone, replaced by a new humility and a genuine respect for my mind and my experience. The greatest change, however, was in his relationship with his own children. He looked at Alex and Chloe with new eyes, seeing them not as kids, but as the sharp, capable young adults they were. He had been so busy managing his father's life that he had failed to notice his own children had surpassed him in wisdom and perception. My revenge was never aimed at my son. It was aimed at a predator, and Daniel was simply collateral damage in the war against her. The true sweet revenge was not her arrest, but the restoration of my own family. It was in the newfound respect in my son's eyes, in the pride I felt for my brilliant grandchildren, and in the quiet, peaceful evenings I now spend in my basement working on my ship models, a retired detective who had been called on to solve one last very personal case. The silence in my house is no longer heavy with loneliness. It is filled with the quiet confidence of a man who knows he is seen, respected, and loved by a family that is finally whole again. Please subscribe, hit the like button, and leave a comment telling me what part of the story you liked most.